What's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kagos with you as we continue to track this coast-to-coast storm that has been unfortunately deadly in parts of the south and a crippling blizzard in the northern plains. We are going to track its movement as it works its way to the east, continuing to move into the deep south, and that is where we have a continued tornado threat through the rest of our afternoon and into the evening. We'll show you exactly that risk area in just a second. Then the severe weather threat moves into the Florida Panhandle overnight and into South Georgia as we move into Thursday. And we're talking about this thing continuing into the weekend. Again, it started last weekend in parts of California, the Pacific Northwest as well. And now we're going to unleash more snow and the potential for an ice storm in the mid-Atlantic and into the Northeast. So we are going to break down that part of the system as well. I'm going to pull back my trusty arrow again, and we are going to look at this system. So as I look to the other computers here, there is our swirl. That is our big upper low responsible for the, again, crippling blizzard that shut down I-90 in parts of South Dakota into Wyoming yesterday. And then you see where we're getting in these darker yellows, darker blues. That's the moisture from those thunderstorms that have unfortunately produced some deadly and destructive tornadoes in parts of the deep south yesterday. So again, that's something we're obviously thinking about, everybody impacted by that yesterday. Here is the satellite and radar composite again, and just looking at the scope here of this system, there is the surface low. The heaviest snow now extending from the arrowhead of Minnesota, some cold rain back down into the heartland of the country, and then where you see the darker reds, that is where we have the ongoing severe weather threat that will continue throughout the afternoon and really ramp up through the afternoon in places like Mississippi, Louisiana, again, the eastern side of the state, and then getting into Alabama, into the panhandle of Florida later on this afternoon into the evening. Then that threat pushes towards the Florida Peninsula. I want to show you this if you are tuning in from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. This is where things could get really ugly. So here's the timeline, and specifically we are focused on these isolated kidney bean shaped cells. So look at the time here. This is about 1 o'clock, anywhere from noon to 2 Central Time. And note how many of those supercell thunderstorms we have depicted here on the model, moving through central Louisiana to the right around Baton Rouge, New Orleans as well. Those storms then push to the east by 4 o'clock. So now we're talking about that main severe weather threat east of Jackson, Mississippi, still hanging around New Orleans. And then later on tonight, we still have a tornado threat in places like Montgomery, Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, and then closing in on the Florida Peninsula. Now, overnight, that severe weather threat is going to shift a little bit toward Valdosta, Panama City, Panhandle, Big Bend of Florida. Watch what happens as we get into tomorrow. Again, there is the future radar showing some nasty storms in and around Jacksonville, Gainesville, the Big Bend of Florida. This is on Thursday morning. This thing is still cranking out the severe weather potential. Now, I do think that gradually this is going to lose its punch as it moves down the Florida Peninsula. We still will have the opportunity for a few brief tornadoes in places northwest of Orlando, west of Orlando, close to Tampa. You see that big flare-up of storms. I'll get my arrow back on to kind of point these back out for you. Even around Daytona Beach, I think this is where we're going to have that juice, if you will, primed for the opportunity for a few brief tornadoes. I don't think we're looking at anything like what we saw in Texas and Oklahoma, and in Alabama, or excuse me, in Louisiana, in Arkansas on Tuesday. Nonetheless, that risk is going to be there. So level 2 out of 5 on the severe weather scale, from Sanford, Orlando, Kissimmee, right along that I-4 corridor, and then to the north and west. That is going to be, relatively speaking, the highest chance for a brief tornado or two to develop. We're not completely out of the woods in terms of the severe weather threat south and east of Orlando, but you see right there, that's where we'll have the chance, again, that green color, that marginal risk, that 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale. The atmosphere has a little bit of juice, But again, we don't have all those ingredients right there. Now, this is going to be something that we are going to watch closely as we get into tomorrow as well. I want to point out this is the supercell potential. What the computer is showing us here is the potential for these storms to take on supercell characteristics, to rotate. And one of the things that we're going to be watching specifically in Central Florida tomorrow are going to be these tracks here, these thunderstorms that are newly developed off of the Gulf of Mexico. So the best opportunity to get a brief tornado or two is going to be northwest of Orlando as these cells kind of roll across the Florida Peninsula. So that's going to be something we're watching really starting as we close in on lunchtime on Thursday and then through early Thursday evening before that threat finally winds down. What is not going to wind down, though, is the cold side of this system. Look at what we have here. We're going to look towards Thursday morning and afternoon, and places like the Arrowhead of Minnesota just getting pounded with heavy snow. Northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, that's the blue there representing the snow. But look at this on Thursday morning as well. Down the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, the mountains of West Virginia, through western and central Pennsylvania, we have the ice popping back up. We have something known as cold air damming going on. So you have a big area of high pressure kind of sitting up into southeast Canada that funnels down the colder air at the surface. It's not cold enough through the entire column at that point anyway to have it all snow. That will change. Watch what happens as we get into Thursday night now. I'll bring my little arrow back. We're starting to see the things wind down in Minnesota into the Great Lakes region, but crazy heavy snow now into New England. Now, if you're watching from the I-95 corridor, the big cities that get crushed in these nor'easter events, we are going to miss out on this one. This is going to be a cold, ugly, nasty rain into New York City, Long Island, down through New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore. Kind of an ugly day on Thursday. Cold rain. We're going to miss out on the snow. Zooming in a little bit, we might be able to change over for a very brief time in Boston to some snow, but most of the big totals, and I will show you some of those totals in a couple of minutes, the forecast totals, are going to be in interior Pennsylvania, through western Massachusetts, through most of New Hampshire, into Vermont, upstate New York, and then a lot of Maine is going to be crushed. What we have going on here is another area of low pressure developing very, very close to the coast. We want the center of low pressure to be kind of out here more if you want to get crushed with good snow in the big cities along the I-95 corridor. That's not happening this time around. And you see as we move further in time, this is now Friday at 6 o'clock. Heavy snow still falling to the west of Boston, to the northwest of New York City. We may end with a few light snow showers in New York City, but again, it's not going to really amount to much. And then still, 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. This storm has now been around for a week. This started last weekend, again, lashing the California coast, lashing the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades with very, very heavy snow and rain. Speaking of rain, we're going to have the freezing rain potential. And what we're talking about freezing rain is that we do have it starting off as snow high up in the atmosphere, way up there. But there's a sliver of warmer air that melts that snow. And then right at the surface, because of that cold air damming that we talked about, the wedge, as it's sometimes known, of that wedge of cold air at the surface, everything remains below surface, and that water droplet freezes on contact. That's when we can have some power outages, certainly in the mountains here, as I look towards my other computer to bring back my trusty arrow. Some places could pick up 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch of ice where you see that dark purple there. I think some of these numbers, at least on the computer, are overestimated. Nonetheless, this is going to cause some travel issues down I-81 in Virginia, into the mountains of West Virginia, even around Pittsburgh through central PA. A light glaze of ice could cause some travel problems early on Friday morning. In terms of the snow, we are going to absolutely get crushed here. A lot of these numbers here from at least the specific model outputs are underdoing it. I think right where you see these dark purple colors here, certainly around Mount Washington, through Vermont, where you see those purple colors come up, we're going to eclipse a foot. Somewhere in this area, we could get into that 12 to 24-inch range as that storm just unloads the rest of its moisture, the last gasp here, as we move into tomorrow and into Friday and through the rest of the weekend. Also, again, it's going to end earlier, but Duluth, we're talking about at least a foot of snow. And you see that bright purple stripe here right along the arrowhead toward Grand Marais. Some lake enhancement off of Lake Superior doing that as well. Some of you might be asking, I'm going to go back to a former slide. It's kind of like a tag team in wrestling here. What's going on? As the system, as the main component that's been responsible for the system, for all the blizzard out west and the severe weather in the south, it's dying out by Thursday morning. So what happens here, and I want to show you this because this is kind of crazy what's going on in the atmosphere. As it's doing that, I'm going to bring my arrow back. It transfers its energy to this coastal low here. So as it's on its way out, we are going to have a secondary area of low pressure, and it's kind of giving its moisture, giving its energy, if you will, to this new coastal low that develops in and around the I-95 corridor. Again, too warm. It's on that borderline, but we miss out on the big snows this time around in New York City and in Boston, Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island. We're missing out on that this time around. So might have another shot before Christmas, but I do think the way that the pattern is shaking out for a potential white Christmas, it is going to favor just inland of the big cities. So we got to have to get lucky here that we get that cold air to kind of push a little bit further to the coast. Alrighty, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, our main concern here over the next 24 to 48 hours is, of course, a severe weather threat in the Deep South. We could have some strong tornadoes again later on Wednesday afternoon and evening into Mississippi, in Eastern Louisiana, in Alabama, in the Florida Panhandle. So make sure you have a way to get your warnings. The Pinpoint Weather app is a great tool to get those warnings right to where you live. Even if you don't live in Florida, the geolocation is going to alert you if the National Weather Service issues a watch or a warning. So make sure you have a way to get those on a day like today or tomorrow before we finally see this severe weather threat wind down across the country on Thursday morning. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw, please give this a thumbs up. Please hit that subscribe button, and we will catch you next time.